Okay, firstly, just want to say I hope you do enjoy this gameplay right here of me playing Dead Space 3. This is like months old after I beat the main campaign of Dead Space 3. This is the DLC. It's called The Awakening. I haven't beaten it yet, but at some point I do plan to beat it. But let's get into what I want to talk about today, and that is the recent news of Dead Space 4. Now, I'm sure you heard this before. Glen Schofield, the co-creator or the original creator of Dead Space, tried to pitch to EA of doing a Dead Space 4 like a year or a year and a half ago now, and EA completely shut down his idea. They didn't want to do a Dead Space 4. They didn't want to do anything Dead Space related. So all hope for a Dead Space 4 was gone. Well, here recently, EA was just purchased, and Glen Schofield is more hopeful now with EA under new leadership that they might want to actually do Dead Space 4 or something Dead Space related. Mostly a Dead Space 4. And I'm really excited. I'm really hoping a Dead Space 4 does happen. I mean, years ago, I would have never played Dead Space. Never. I always got scared of the monsters. I got scared of the jump scares. Like everything about the game just scared me as a kid. But here we are, years later, and I've played Dead Space 3. I'm finishing up the DLC, and I even played a little bit of Dead Space Remake. That's another game I need to finish. But I like it all. I mean, I like the story. I like the armor. I like the monsters. I like the guns. I like everything about Dead Space. Even the lore is pretty cool, and the lore about the necromorphs is awesome. And I do really hope we get to see an ending to Isaac's story at some point. So I am really hoping to like see a Dead Space 4 now. But this all depends on EA because it depends on if they want to do it or not. Now there are some concerns about Dead Space 4. What happened with Dead Space Remake. Dead Space Remake was a huge hit. I mean, everywhere I went, people were praising Dead Space Remake. Articles I was seeing, they were praising it, calling it one of the best remakes they've ever seen. And there maybe was like one or two videos out there, maybe an article or two, uh, of people saying it wasn't like their favorite remake or it just wasn't for them. But overall, I mean, everybody liked it. And, you know, everybody was hoping to see a Dead Space 2. Well, EA shut that down because of one thing. That's because it only sold 2 million copies. And they were hoping for it to sell like 5 million, which, didn't happen. And so that's one of the reasons why they did not want to continue with Dead Space. And that is a concern with Dead Space 4. Could Dead Space 4 reach higher numbers than Dead Space Remake, or could it not? Because I mean, if it doesn't, it might be a failure in EA's eye, and they might think it's just a repeat of Dead Space Remake. So who knows what could happen there? Another thing to worry about is that what happened with Dead Space 3. Um, you know, Dead Space 3 is completely different from all the other Dead Space games. And I noticed that when I played Dead Space Remake and then went back to play Dead Space 3. I noticed how widely different they are. Dead Space Remake is really more focused on survival horror, while Dead Space 3 it is more action packed. And other things you can notice too is that in Dead Space Remake, you have to be really focused on how much ammo, how much resources you use, while in Dead Space 3, I didn't really have to be that focused on all the ammo I used or resources I used because I was always finding it consistently. No matter what, I was finding ammo, I was finding the resources. There was never a doubt in my mind that I wouldn't find more ammo around the corner. So I had nothing to worry about. Other things too is that no one cared for the story in Dead Space 3. No one cared for it, and no one liked the little love triangle that they had going on in Dead Space 3. So that is some concerns, because another thing too I should have mentioned before that is that Glenn wants to bring the some of the people back that were part of the original Dead Space team to do Dead Space 4. Now that sounds good, but the thing is, that is also the team that did Dead Space 3. Now, hopefully they don't repeat what happened with Dead Space 3, but there's always that worry that they might repeat it. But, hopefully they don't, and they learn from their lesson, and they actually stick to what the franchise always was, and they don't go straying off path to doing something way different from what the fans wanted. That's a one good thing right there. It's both like a double-edged sword. The team is coming back, but that's the same team who did Dead Space 3. So that is something to be worried about. Another thing too, this is also like a double-edged sword, is that EA is in huge debt right now. I looked it up, it was like 20 billion, and that's a lot of money. And EA has to put forth money to want to do Dead Space 4. Now, Glenn has said that he can save them money by if they give him the models that were used to build Dead Space Remake, so it could save them money. But that was when EA was under different leadership, and when they like dropped his whole idea for Dead Space 4. So I hope he still wants to use those models from Dead Space Remake so it wouldn't cost him so much. But who knows, he might not want to. But if he does still want to use them, I feel like that $20 billion debt, they wouldn't have to worry too much about Dead Space 4, because now he's got resources that they have already used, and they can focus on trying to get rid of that debt instead of trying to put money into Dead Space 4. But the reason why I said earlier this is like another double-edged sword is because if EA has to make like cutbacks or lay off people, which I feel bad for people who get laid off, but if they have to make cutbacks and sell off like projects and stuff, Dead Space could be something they sell off, and it might go to a studio that might actually want to do something with Dead Space. So that could be good, because if EA doesn't want to do anything with Dead Space or do a Dead Space 4, then it could go to a studio that wants to do it, and then a Dead Space 4 could happen. So again, that $20 billion debt, it's both good and bad. And at the end of the day, a Dead Space 4 could still happen. But tell me what y'all think. Do y'all think Dead Space 4 is definitely going to happen, or is it just a slight chance it might happen? I think it's a slight chance it happens, but who knows? Maybe EA bites the bullet and actually does it, or they might just sell it off to a studio that will do it. But tell me what y'all think. I'm 100% thinking it's probably gonna happen, but sometimes I'm too optimistic about things, and they just don't happen. But again, just tell me, and I will see you next time when I do something like this. Peace.